I think I know the answer to this, Charles, but how are you feeling this morning?
Yeah, touch nervous, Ben. Little bit nervous. Quite a big night ahead of us, obviously at the Emirates later. But yeah, feeling good, feeling ready.
Yes, quite a big night. I think is downplaying it a little bit. I think
A
Mikel
bit.
said it's one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game, the Emirates has ever seen. Arsenal versus PSG, Champions League semi-final first leg. Of course, this is a reunion from the league phase meeting. Arsenal beat PSG 2-0 that day, and we know that PSG are a much different team to the one that rocked up at the Emirates then. But they've hit a bit of a sticky patch recently, PSG. Just one win in their last four. They lost their invincible status at the weekend in Ligue 1. So for you, is this maybe the best or the worst time to be facing PSG?
Uh, I'd prefer to be facing them now, I guess, rather than when they're in the sort of height of their best form. They've certainly, like you said, hit a little bit of what you'd call a sticky patch. Now, I think you sort of have to caveat that with the fact that the league title is done and dusted, and that just does take the edge off things a little bit for them. They've obviously had their eyes on this game for the last few weeks, just like Arsenal have. I mean, Arsenal's form isn't great going into this either, so PSG could be saying exactly the same thing. So I think all sort of bets are off when it comes to tonight's game. I don't think league form and what we've seen in the last couple of weeks from either team is going to play any sort of factor in tonight. It's just going to be about when the bell rings at 8 p.m. later on. It's just about who's on it from the start. So yeah, I don't pay too much attention, I have to say, to what the last couple of weeks has shown us when it comes to league form.
Yeah, it is that cliche, isn't it? Form goes out the window in such a massive game like this. And there are some really key battles in this one. Of course, we know that Arsenal will have no Partey, no Jorginho. That midfield could be key. But for me, I look at the fullback areas because I mean Hakimi and Mendes, they've been rampaging up and down those flanks throughout the entire Champions League. But in Timber and Lewis Skelly, you might suggest that Arsenal are decently equipped to deal with them. So, I mean, is that fullback area the key one for you, or is the midfield battle going to be pivotal? What is one area that you think could define tonight's game?
I think like you, I think the flanks are going to be where this game's won and lost. Midfield is very, very important. I think if Arsenal can sort of dominate that physically like they did back in October, then they're going to be on the front foot. But I just look at the space that both teams have down the flank and the weapons that they have down there, and whoever comes out on top in those sort of one-on-one battles that they're going to have, it's going to be hugely important to how this game pans out. You're right when you look at PSG's fullbacks in Hakimi and Mendes. Excellent. You look at how Mendes. We know how much of a threat, sorry, Hakimi is. But Mendes as well, you look at what they did against Liverpool, what he did against Salah. He was very, very good that night. But Bukayo Saka caused PSG all sorts of problems back in October. And so whoever comes out on top of that battle is going to be huge. And then when you look at PSG's threat that they have going forward, not just the fullbacks, but the wide areas in attack, Kvaratskhelia, Desire Doué, whoever's going to be playing out there, whether it's him or Barcola, there's so much pace and potency in those flanks, and it's where they really look to be dangerous. But in Arsenal, they've got Duran Timber and Miles Lewis Skelly. You don't really get better one-on-one defenders, fullbacks than that when it comes to winning their personal battles and personal duels. I'm pretty sure I saw this stat, and don't quote me on it, although I'm quoting myself on it. But I think Miles Lewis Skelly is the only fullback who hasn't been dribbled past in the Champions League this season. Which just shows how good he is one on one in those sort of battles. So, as much as they are so threatening PSG out wide, whether it be the fullbacks on the overlap or the actual attackers, Arsenal have got two fullbacks themselves who are so good at dealing with that. During Timber against Vinicius Junior in the previous round was always going to be such a key battle, and During Timber won it by an absolute distance. He was so good in both of those legs, as was Lewis Skelly, and that just nullified Real Madrid's attack to the point when they were just throwing crosses into the box because they didn't even want to try and get past him anymore. And if Arsenal can do that again, if Lewis Skelly and Jordan Timber can play as well as that again against PSG, that just takes an awful lot of threat away from them, and then Arsenal can really concentrate on doing damage themselves. So I think you're right. It's a long-winded answer, I know, but I think you're absolutely right. The fullback areas, the flanks, is where this battle is going to be won or lost.
I think you might have tempted fate there with that Lewis Skelly stat. He's now going to be drawn past 3 or 4 times tonight, thanks to you. So, Gullit, you can thank Charles Watts for a Miles Lewis Skelly disaster class. I'm joking. Anyway, so Lewis Skelly, we've just spoken about the midfield as well. He could be a wild card option in that midfield, of course. No Partey, no Jorginho. You'd expect, I mean, Mikel Merino, thankfully, he trained yesterday, so looking like he'll be fit. You'd expect he would fill in midfield and Declan Rice maybe drops a bit deeper. But then you do lose what Marino gives you up front. Of course, Trossard thankfully has hit form as well. I mean, is the Rice, Marino, Odegaard midfield, does that have to be the midfield three for you, or could we see a Lewis Skelly or Zinchenko or even Ben White wildcard in there?
No, I think it has to be Rice, Marino, Odegaard. I'd be stunned if we get there and that's not the lineup. I think having Marino back fit was so important. I was so relieved to see him in training yesterday. Um, Again, I go back to that game in October and how Arsenal physically dominated PSG. Obviously, it's a different midfield setup tonight than it was back then, but Arsenal was so strong in that midfield area, and as good as PSG's players are. And I listened to Vitinha's press conference yesterday, and he got a bit angry. He was bristling at the sort of questions about whether physically they're going to be strong enough to deal with Arsenal. But they're clearly thinking about that. They will remember what happened back in October. And so I would still go with a more physically dominant midfield there with Party in Party's absence. I'd have Rice at the six, have Marino as the eight. Trossard's hot right now up front, and Trossard can either be hot, and when he's hot, he's hot. When he's not, he can be like the most frustrating footballer in the world, where you think you're so good, yet you're doing ridiculously bad things. But right now, he's in a really good run of form. So I think that's really fortunate for Arsenal. So you just have him as the striker tonight, have Marino as the eight, let him win his duels, which we know he's so good at. Rice can do the same. And if Arsenal can just really get on top and frustrate and deny space for PSG and those little sort of mercurial players that they have in that midfield, then it could be a really, really good night for Arsenal. I always go back to that game in October. And I know PSG are trying to pretend it doesn't mean anything, but I think it does. As much as they're different now, Arsenal are different now. It's just that sort of muscle memory that both sets of players have from that night. Arsenal know they can beat them. Arsenal know they can be physically too strong for them. PSG know that as well. And so, as much as I think both sides are sort of playing down how important that game back in October is, from an Arsenal point of view, I'd much rather it happen than it didn't, if you see what I mean, because it just gives you that extra little bit of belief, I think, going into this game.
Yeah, it's hard to shake those memories, especially if it's in just the previous 6 months or so.
Mm.
And, this could be so Arsenal men are bidding to reach the final after the Arsenal women pulled off that stunning comeback against their own French opponent in Lyon. So they're back in the final for the first time in, I think, is it 18 years? First time back
Mm.
in the final. So we could see, Arsenal versus Barcelona in the women's final and potentially the men's final as well. And this would be just the second time in history that a men's and women's team from the same club could reach their Champions League finals in one season. I think Chelsea did it 4 years ago. If Arsenal men and women can both win the Champions League this season, would this be the greatest season in Arsenal's history?
I mean, it'd be up there, wouldn't it? It'd be something that no one's ever done before. If that happens, if they were to win both, I mean, what the women did in on a Sunday was absolutely remarkable. It was such an impressive result to go to Lyon. The might of Lyon trailing after the first leg and to turn it around and to win it so comfortably. It was just a fabulous result, and that the men should be looking at as a real inspiration. I think it tells a story as well that we need to remember that today is only the first game. Whatever happens, the tie is still going to be alive. So I think you've got to remember that it's a 180-minute tie, not 90 minutes tie. But there's got to be a real inspiration for the men tonight. That whatever happens, you can overturn anything in this format. And I'm so delighted for the women as well. You seeing the images afterwards, seeing Lou Williamson, what it meant to her on the pitch, players like that. It's just a fabulous occasion. And yeah, I mean, would it be the most successful season in the club's history? It's hard pushed to say no, to be honest. If both teams win the Champions League and are crowned European champions, it's hard to say no. Obviously, the league's been a disappointment. Arsenal haven't been good enough, but there's still a historic season there to be achieved this season. And yeah, I think if Arsenal go on and win the Champions League in 30 years' time, no one's going to say, oh, they finished second to Liverpool in that season in the league, are they? All they're going to remember, all that's probably going to end up being put up around the images of outside the stadium is Arsenal with a Champions League trophy. It's not Arsenal finishing second behind Liverpool in the league. So it's the chance to write your name into history.